introduce the professor, Professor Jeon. He's going to be presenting today. He teaches 4 finance courses in the finance department. One of them, which is has a lot to do with what he's going to be teaching today, which is Fin 699, the introduction to fintech. He also teaches 2 other derivatives courses and a principles of finance course. So I put his I'm going to put his link in the discussion here so you guys can review and see if you want to take any of his stuff, read some of his research. But he's a great professor, very knowledgeable about this stuff. So I hope you learn a lot from him today, and I'll pass it over to him.
All right. Give me a second. Can someone confirm that they can see my screen here?
Yeah, I see.
Okay, awesome. All right. Thanks very much for the introduction, Noah. And thank you very much for this invitation to this nice event. So today, as briefly discussed earlier, I want to spend some time talking about this, maybe something not everyone is focusing on, but I think something definitely interesting enough that I'm hoping more people to be aware of. That is how to make a passive income or generate the yield out of the cryptocurrency market. So mainly I'm going to spend some time talking about what DeFi is, that many of you probably have heard about it over the course of the last couple of years, or maybe not. So just want to talk briefly about what the DeFi does and why is it going to be maybe important, maybe not, and talk about the specific areas of investment that could be potentially interesting to some of you. So to start off with the idea about why DeFi all of a sudden at this stage, right? So let me just go trace back all the way to the history. By the way, some of these slides are coming from my lecture slides. So if you are taking my course, you've seen this already. So going back all the way to how human beings began the activity of trading, right? How did people trade at the very beginning? The initial form of the market exchange was obviously the famous peer-to-peer, P2p fashion. So this type of trading is also known as the barter system. So basically, when you want a good, so let's say you want a meat, and in exchange, you can provide a fish. What will you do? You will basically go find someone else who is willing to exchange a meat for fish, as shown in the figure. So this was a barter system. At the origin, this was the only way for people to trade to get what they want in exchange for what other people wanted. But this, as you can obviously imagine, this was extremely inefficient because whenever the trade needs to occur, the supply and demand has to be exactly matched in between each other, right? You always have to find someone who has the exact amount of goods to be traded for the exact amount of goods you have in hand so that there is no leftover. So this has a merit in the sense that this doesn't come up with any cost at all, right? You're just meeting with someone else. As long as there's a match in the demand and supply, then you get what you want, the other person gets what they want, and you don't have to pay it. So it is good for that sense, it's peer-to-peer, but then it's inefficient because of the trading has to be facilitated by meeting each other in person. So what happened is that this is a huge problem because the demand and supply have to be matched at every single time. People have invented this thing called money, so they can store value. And at the very beginning, we didn't have anything money in the form that we are dealing with in modern times. So people just used anything that seems to be valuable, that people found it something that seems to be unique that people would like to have. So basically like pretty stones and nice shells if your civilization was found near the beach area, for instance. So these were the initial types of money that people were willing to accept it and willing to agree that they carry some value. So they are happy to exchange their real goods for these money. And in the namely, the forms of stones or shells. Now, at this point of the time, these types of money were no longer close to being centralized, right? There's no government entity or kingdoms or anything that was guaranteeing that these carry value. So this was really just used among those individuals who believe that they have value, right? So if you use this money in certain area, if you travel to the other region, they say like, hey, what are you talking about? This doesn't have any value. Why are you giving this to me for exchanging the goods? So there's no central authority guaranteeing that this is being valuable in certain area versus not, but at least this was the first time the concept of money among. And then we all know later on, as the society became more civilized, more centralized, and the concept of nations came along, the modern concept of money basically naturally had emerged, which was issued and fully controlled by the central government, right? The name, the bank. Now, these money that we use nowadays in modern times has unique characteristics in the sense that, number one, they are uncollateralized. So if you think about it, there is no guarantee these money that's been printed by the government are backed by real assets, right? So it's not like if you have a Canadian dollar, you can always guarantee it to be exchanged to something else that carries the value. It's just guaranteed by the government. If the government fails, which we have seen in many cases in other countries, obviously not so much in where we live, but in other areas of the world, we've seen their local currency failing in many occasions. And because of those currencies are not collateralized at all, they're not backed up by any real asset, they just lose their value. And moreover, the control of this money is completely centralized by the government, right? So the whole control, issuance, and guaranteeing the value that's been used within the country or around the world are fully controlled by the government. So central institutions like Federal Reserve Board, or in the case of Canada, it's going to be Bank of Canada, they are the one who's behind the control of this money. So that's where we are sitting at somewhat right now in the history of how the market exchange, the medium of exchange was being used in the forms of money. Now, the current centralized financial system that relies on this money issued by the central government faces few problems. And this is what the decentralized finance or the blockchain technology is trying to solve through. So few items, I'm not going into detail. I mean, it's not a lecture. I'm hoping to jump into the investment part as quick as possible. But just to name a few, a single entity controlling everything is like a double-edged sword, that it might be a good thing when things are under the radar, but when things go wrong, they can significantly go wrong. And having limited access is another problem. This is a growing concern, and how the fintech is trying to solve. The number of unbanked people around the world, not so much in Canada, but surprisingly, even in the States, is still surprisingly high. So it's kind of amazing that around the world, there are people who have smartphone, but they don't have a bank account. Surprisingly, that's true. So that's actually something that current centralized financial system is struggling with. And inefficiency is the biggest problem that blockchain / the decentralized finance are trying to solve. This is one of the biggest problems, that whenever you are using money to purchase your goods or do your daily activities, there is always some hidden fees that you might not be fully aware of, but there is there that intermediaries charge amount that is beyond imagination, right? So whenever you're using your credit card, well, obviously it's all embedded in your price, so you don't really get to see it, but they are actually charging roughly 3% for each transaction. That's how the revenue is coming through, and that's why those companies like Visa and MasterCard are so much profitable overall out of paying. So this kind of intermediary / middleman is the central core of the current financial system, but not necessarily they have to be there, right? There's no reason to believe it's something that has to be necessarily be there. It's a must. Not really. So that's something that we might want to rebuild if we want to revisit the current financial system, how it can be improved further upon in the future. And a couple of other items, the lack of interoperability, which has actually dramatically improved a lot over the course of past few years, but still lacking quite a bit, that when you want to transfer large capital from even one bank to the other bank, right, in Canada, like you're transferring like, let's say $100,000 from TD to BMO, that still takes 2 to 5 business days because they have to verify the amount is correct and everything. Although for the smaller amount, the e-transfer system in Canada especially is extremely efficient to do it in a matter of seconds. So, but for large amount, this is still quite a problem, the lacking the interoperability across different institutions. And then finally, lack of transparency is another issue, that what these banks do, what they do with customers' money and so forth. This could be quite a bit of problem because we just have to blindly trust what these banks are doing overall, right? We really have no access to the bank's balance sheet. That's what they're currently holding, what kind of risky activities they might be engaged in. Of course, the government provides a certain level of guarantees. I believe the level the Canadian government guarantees is up to $100,000 in case the bank goes to default, but any amount beyond that is incurred as a loss if anything happens to the financial institution, which is not a surprising thing if that happens, again, as we have seen back in the 2008 financial crisis period. So to mention how bad it has been in terms of how inefficient, to put it to the ultimatum, decentralized transactions began something around back in 1970-ish. So Western Union was the first one, pioneer in this field, tried to transfer money from one party to the other. So let's look at this figure, because I find it hilarious. This was basically Western Union guaranteeing the transfer of $300 from one party to the other. I cannot really read this, but it's transferring $300 to the other, as you can see from the bottom. And how much do they charge, right? You see that total cost they charged at the end was $9.34. So total cost to do this was $309.30. In other words, the fee that you had to pay to intermediary was around 3.11. Now, this was around roughly now 150 years, right? 149 years as of 2022 right now. How much do you have to pay in order to transfer your fee, your dollar, to to the merchant. Your credit card companies still charge a fees of 3%. Well, it's still slightly different, right? It's not really apple-to-apple comparison because credit card companies charge fees for also based on the case you might go to default. So they have that, they actually are bearing the risk that you actually use their credit card and they default. But still, assuming that most of people do not default on their credit card bills, 3% sounds like not much improvement since compared to 150 years ago. So is this something that can be solved by decentralized finance protocols through the blockchain technology? So that's really the idea. Here, same thing as the banks, right? When we get the interest rate from the banks, they charge a lot of spread in between the lending rate and the borrowing. So is this something that can be improved further upon by taking away those cuts gained by financial institutions, namely those intermediaries, through the advancement of the blockchain technology? So that has been the main development in the area of the cryptocurrency / blockchain technology starting from 2020 summer. That's the first time when this term called decentralized finance became popular. This was really hot deal at the first half of 2021. And then later it kind of lost interest. Not many people talk about it as much as it used to be before because as you may all be aware of, the NFTs took the attention from the public. So people all talk about now NFTs and gamings in the cryptocurrencies. Now, not many people talk about DeFi anymore. But my personal opinion is DeFi has much more potential to penetrate through our financial system to reshape and rebuild the way things are being done in the long term, in my opinion. So this was a Forbes article back in June 6, 2021, basically arguing that how much passive income you can earn out of crypto compared to what you can earn from your banks. So this was really low interest rate era, right? Has gone up a little bit since the Fed has jacked up the interest rate last month, and they're planning to do so multiple times in the future. But back then, when you go to the bank, they pay like 0.25%, right? 0.25% was a prime stake. And even if you walk into the Canadian banks right now, you get a rate from the savings is probably 0.25%. If you lock in your money into GIC account, maybe you can get 1 to 2% depending on the institution. That's probably the max you can get for you. But if you actually go into the cryptos and you deposit your stable coins, for instance, namely those cryptocurrencies that has a value pegged to USD, so it's guaranteed to have a value 1-to-1 with the $1 dollars, they will pay you 6% or even more in the annual yield. So I'm not even, although this article is really talking about the staking yield, that's not the focus what I want to talk about. But even in the basically depositing your stable coins that's supposed to design to have 1-to-1 peg to USD, you can easily make 6% out of it. And some particular decentralized finance protocols that if you're not afraid of your token's value falling 20% or more, that you can gain way more out of your staking yield. So I'm not going into that. That's another topic maybe for another day. But I'm more focused on the stable income opportunities. So I want to focus on like passive income opportunities in decentralized finance, right? So what does passive income mean? That can mean multiple different things. But in today's presentation, whenever I talk about the passive income, it exactly means in the sense that we don't take price risk of the cryptocurrency market. In other words, my income has nothing to do, is completely orthogonal to where the Bitcoin price is going. So Bitcoin price going up 20%, Ether price falling down 30%, has nothing to do with me. My return is still there. I'm not losing my principal. So that's where the passive is coming from in the idea of the talk today. So again, I know everyone is excited and hyper about investing in cryptocurrencies to make 10x returns in a year, which many of you probably have succeeded. Many of you are still looking forward to it. But it's not like you have your entire asset locked up in the cryptocurrencies, right? You still have your savings account. You still have some of your money that you have to keep it as a cash. And this is really what I want to focus on. Rather than keeping them in a bank, you might want to still consider keeping some of your liquid assets, cash account, in the crypto to earn higher rate of return than what you've got centralized financial systems through the bank, through your GIC or through your savings. So you can actively search for the opportunities to generate actually unbelievably, insanely high yield, something above 10% annualized yield opportunities with a very limited downside risk nowadays. Even now, still go for this hunt for 10%. Used to be much better 1 year ago when people were more crazy about crypto that everyone is borrowing to push the coin. Still nowadays, you can easily get 6 to 8%. If you go aggressive, you can go with more than 10% with a slightly more amount of risk. So there's much more stuff that can be done through these centralized finance protocols where you can get these kind of investment. Now, why is this possible? Now, if everyone has taken a finance course, there cannot be free lunch. There has to be risk when there is a return. Now, in my opinion, why such an investment is possible, and there's a huge bold idea, at least for now. So I don't think this is going to be persistent. This can be something that that's available for the next 10, 20 years. This is because of the inefficiencies surrounding the cryptocurrencies, that too many people want to invest in this, too many people want to buy it, but less amount of capital can flow in, right? Because especially the institutional capital cannot really flow into this. People are prohibited from trading cryptocurrencies as an institution. So it's only really the retail money. Now, if you're the retail investor entering the cryptocurrency market, everyone is just thinking to buy token that's gonna go up like 20% a day or few x a year. They're not really interested in buying stable coins and put it in the savings account. Many people don't neglect that opportunity is there. So it's really just jumping into that, gapping that bridge in between requirement for the capital and then lack of the capitals that can enter the market. So the problem right now in the cryptocurrency market is that people working in the institution who can have infinite amount of capitals that can flow in for higher yield have limited access to this, while retail investors like us, we have unlimited access to the market. So it's actually good opportunity for you, instead of having money locked up in your savings account, to get money out of this decentralized finance protocols that can pay a much higher yield with seemingly low risk compared to the return get. So what are the possible ways that you can invest in these decentralized finance protocols for a higher yield, getting stable returns? There are, largely speaking, 3 different types of protocols that operates in blockchains, in different blockchains right now. The most straightforward one is the peer-to-peer or user-to-user lending protocols, which directly generalize the concept of peer-to-peer lending platforms, P2p lending. So basically what you do is you provide your stable coins, let's say Tether or USDC, and people have used it perhaps. That's basically a stable coin pegged to a value of USD 1-to-1 guaranteed by real assets in theory. And you just provide your liquidity to there, and then whoever is borrowing it is going to pay interest to you. And these are all over collateralized in the sense that there's no issue that your asset, your initial amount you have lent is not going to be paid back. So this is basically literally resembling what the banking activity does, right? Basically, you go to the bank, you deposit your money. Instead, you're just going into this P2P protocols, and then you provide your stablecoin lending in there instead. So that's a more basic form. And then there is an alternative, little bit more advanced form, so-called the AMM, automated market maker of the stablecoin. So basically, the idea is that in the world of the crypto, there is not a single stable coin that is dominant. So depending on the usage, you sometimes want to switch between one stable coin versus the other. USDT, Tether, and USDC are the 2 most popular ones, but there are other coins like DAI and UST and BUSD, if you have heard about it. So there are multiple different stable coins, although they always serve the same purpose, to have a 1-to-1 peg to USD. Now, people sometimes need to trade off between these stable coins because they have specific usage that they need a particular coin at each point of the time. But it's not so easy to change from one stablecoin to the other for them. So they actually provide a pool where they pool all the providing assets from different people. So I provide like $1,000 of USDT, Tether, and then the other person provides $1,000 of USDC, and people can come and easily, freely exchange between these provided liquidity to change from Tether to USDC and vice versa. And then whoever provided liquidity to this pool are going to get rewarded, because every time this exchange occurs, this swapping occurs, they are going to have to pay certain amount of fee. The market standard is 0.3%. So that's the amount of the fee that you can expect to gain. In annualized rate, this used to be really high. Annualized rate used to be like 7 to 8%. Nowadays, it can kind of boil down a little bit. It's much less than what it used to be. But when the market heats up again, I'm sure there will be more opportunities out of these swaps that you can get fee out. And lastly, the one of more interesting idea here is the so-called the yield aggregator. Now, this is more a bit advanced concept so let's just think about the first one. Right? The easiest example would be user-to-user lending. So whenever you are depositing your money, you're lending your money so that you're going to earn interest. So what these protocols do is they pay you interest in every block. So you can basically think of your interest is being paid every 10 seconds or 5 seconds, depending on which blockchain you're using. Now, the problem is whenever these interests are paid, they are not automatically reinvested. So in other words, they are not accumulated. Now, as you have probably seen in many finance courses in other contexts, the power of compounding is extraordinary, right? Compounding more frequent versus less frequent makes a huge difference when it comes down to the annualized return. So in theory, in order to maximize your return, you should be compounding as frequent as possible. So in other words, ideally speaking, you want to go get your interest compounded again after 10 seconds, after 1 minute, after every every other time that you can do. But of course, we have a daily life to do, so we cannot really do it ourselves every single instant. So what these yield aggregators do is they automate the jobs for you to maximize your return. So basically, basically you delegate your deposit to them, and they are going to take it from there, and then they're going to basically optimally compound your returns to maximize the yield. So this kind of yield aggregator is very unique in the cryptocurrency market. We don't see such kind of things in the real financial. So I think this is kind of interesting renovation, interesting kind of stuff that came out of the cryptocurrency market that is kind of layer 2, right? Second layer protocols. That you have layer 1, which is the basic lending / swap protocols, and then you have another layer where you are building on top of it. So to just give a quick idea about how this peer-to-peer lending protocols works, again, this is the most straight form of the DeFi protocols that you just deposit or supply your stable coins in here, and then you get time-varying interest, continuous interest rate according to it. And then the biggest advantage of this compared to the centralized financial system, obviously, you don't need banks. This is peer-to-peer fashion. So there's no intermediary or middleman taking the cuts from. The two biggest ones that does this are called Aave and Compound, which are unfortunately both operating on the Ethereum blockchain, which is the biggest one. So if you have ever used the Ethereum blockchain yourself, the biggest problem is the gas fee. So whenever you are actually going to even open up the account, let's say something equivalent, just enable the deposits of particular coin in these protocols, the gas fee used to be like $100 USD, which is kind of nonsense, right? You're not going to pay $100 to be just able to deposit. And every time you deposit or withdraw any amount of money, that's also going to cost good $10 to $20 USD. So this is not really meant for retail investors, unless you are going to invest, I don't know, $100,000 of US, probably not so much for interest out of retail investors like us. But yeah, this is more for the large players. But the amount of money that's locked up in these protocols are insane. Like they're really a huge amount of money. As you can see, the snapshot, I took it probably last year sometime when I gave this presentation somewhere else. So USDC, they had like $5.7 billion that was locked up in this protocol. Now, luckily speaking, what we could do in modern times, right now, nowadays, is that there are other blockchains that also provide these services other than Ethereum that has a high liquidity in it. So good examples, if you have dealt with it, is Solana, Luna, or Avalanche. Those are the three biggest blockchains or networks that provide these decentralized finance protocols with an extremely low amount of fees. So including the Binance Smart Chain as well. So I forgot about that. So Binance Smart Chain, Solana, Luna, or Terra, depending on what you want to call it, and the Avalanche, they are actually where the DeFi protocols are more migrating towards to it, absorbing a lot of liquidity. And the gas fee in those protocols is extremely cheap, like less than a penny. So you can actually do pretty much all the transactions, as many transactions as you want, and a very small amount fee that you pay. And you can enjoy pretty much, I think, 6 to 7% is the yield that you're going to get out of these protocols just by literally depositing your stable coins, namely USDT Tether or USDC coin, depending on your favorite. Now, this higher yield is partially possible because of not just coming from everything is coming from the interest, but these protocols also give you its native governance tokens. In the case of Aave, this is AAVE token, which it's a price surge like 90% in the last month or so because of their new version 3 integration. And there's a token for another protocol called Compound, which is COMP. So basically what they do is whenever you provide the liquidity, you are the customer, whichever, either you're borrowing or either you're supplying the liquidity, then as a reward, they are going to give you some of their tokens, right? So they're going to give you tokens and people trade these tokens at a very high price. Now, it's not my concern whether these tokens have fundamental values or not, but people do pay for it. These are traded in decentralized exchanges. So as long as you can sell it for money, then that's fine. So you get these tokens as a reward that works as kind of a boost in terms of amount of yield you're going to get. So for instance, this was the example of a Compound protocol for the Tether deposit. So the actual interest rate you're going to get is actually a bit low. It's only 2.34%, but they kind of top it up because you are the royal customer, you are using your protocol. So they top up with their own tokens worth of around 1.23%. So the effective yield coming out of this Compound protocol, thus net rate turns out to be 3.58. So again, this is another thing why these are extremely attractive right now, because they cannot do this forever. They cannot pay out their governance tokens, native tokens forever, because otherwise they run out of this value. if you have infinite amount. But right now, it's very early stage of these protocols. So to attract more users, they are going to give you more and more incentives over time to have protocols, to have more users, more liquidity, more supply comes. So this is another thing why I said it might not last forever, but right now probably there's good opportunity to keep your money instead of savings, but you can consider lending product. Now, the way the interest rate works is that they vary every block. So every 10 seconds, let's say you have a new interest rate out of that's going to be given to you. So common interest rate model uses the following piecewise linear model. So again, well, not probably too much interesting at this point, but what really matters is that there is two types of interest that you're going to get, two slopes. So in the normal times, when there's not many people borrowing, usually around 80%. So if not many people are borrowing, the interest rate is relatively low, as you have seen. But once people start borrowing beyond certain thresholds, usually 80% of total money supplied, then the interest rate jumps all of a sudden. So actually last year, we've seen the interest rate staying stable around like 18 to 20% in these protocols over the March-April period of 21. So we might see that again or not, but this is usually how the interest rate is being determined. Just basically the balance between how many people are willing to lend and how many people are willing to deposit, as it should be, as intuitive it is. Now, you may be a little bit disappointed the amount of the yield that I'm presenting here. It's like 5%, maximum 6%. If you're looking for a higher number, there is an alternative model that is an anchor that is operating on the Terra blockchain. Now it also expanded to Avalanche blockchain, but the nature is really on the Terra blockchain. So the Terra blockchain is, again, it's a competitor of the Ethereum that has gained extraordinary attention over the past few months. This is one of the top 10 cryptocurrency by the market capitalization. And they have their own native stablecoin, namely Terra USD, or UST is the ticker. So this again serves the same purpose. It's supposed to have a one-to-one peg to USD. Now, they have their own decentralized finance protocol operating on this Terra chain, namely the Anchor. And this is actually very unique that they operate in an alternative model and pays extraordinarily high interest rates. So right now, the snapshot I took it probably a couple of days ago, the annualized interest rate they pay out of this protocol is unbelievably high, 19.47%. So which is almost 20% a year guaranteed stable income. So there's no risk because this is deposit. So only risk is really the counterparty risk, that if the whole thing goes to default or entire protocol gets hacked, then you lose everything. But otherwise, there's no other price risk. So Bitcoin price going up, Luna price going up or down, that doesn't matter. You're still guaranteed to get 20%. And this model, because it's available because of this interest is backed by the staking returns. So as long as Luna price is sustainable, probably it's too high right now. I don't know, who knows? But as long as the price is sustainable, this yield is also sustainable in this model. So if you're looking for some short-term investing with a high interest yield, Anchor is something definitely you might want to consider thinking about. Not everything you have, but at least some portion of it to enjoy 20% interest out. So these kind of things are actually becoming very interesting here. The amount of money that's been locked up in this decentralized finance protocols has like skyrocketed over the last year in 2021. So this snapshot that was taken in sometime like October 2021, it has peaked in like December 2021, has come down a little bit, but there are like literally like multiple billions of dollars of locked up in these individual protocols. The biggest one, Aave, they have like 22 or 23 billion dollars of money that's been locked up in these protocols, which is an insanely large amount. So you might want to consider this lending. It's very simple to use. It's extremely simple as long as you have one of those web wallets like MetaMask, if you have used it, then or other native wallets of the specific blockchains that you're using, like Terra and Solana. You need their own wallets because they are not the ERC20 networks. But however, the actual usage, there's a lot of tutorials on the web. The blog posts are abundant. That's super easy to use. So you might want to try it yourself, interested. And first type of yield where they can come. And the second type of yield that you may want to consider is that, as I've explained, the automated market makers of the stables, where the biggest such protocol is namely the Curve Find, where they have literally $3 to $4 billion of locked in. So again, as I've explained earlier, the idea here is that there are multiple number of different stable coins that exist out there, and people often have a need to trade from one to the other. And it's not so easy to do with the centralized exchanges. So they will actually have to use often decentralized finance protocols such as Curve to swap between USDC to US and vice versa. And if you actually lock up your liquidity in here, for each of those trades, you're going to get your own pie. So they're going to pay 0.3% of the entire transaction as a fee. And depending on how much of the pie you have in the pool, you're going to get paid accordingly. And the rates of the return has been, again, quite good over the course of last year. And again, those rates are highly boosted by the fact that they pay your native token, namely the Curve CRV. So as you can see here in this particular example, the actual APY, actual return you're going to get out of the fee was only 1.81%. But out of these other extra tokens you're going to get CRV token as well as the synthetics SNX token. So these tokens give you the yield of something like as low as 6.5%, as high as 10.12%, depending on how much lockup you're going to basically come. So this is another way of considering trying to see how much you're going to get. So whenever the users use this pool to stablecoin to another, the liquidity providers collect an incentive. So Curve is actually, sorry, I must correct myself when I said earlier, 0.3% is a standard. That's more for the automated market maker. In case of the Curve, they pay much less swap fee. They only pay 0.04%, but then the volume is high enough to cover your yield in that. So again, the majority of the yield really comes from the reward token, but that's something you may want to focus on, whether you like the specific reward token, that you can keep it as a token, but otherwise you can sell it for your profit. Now, the overall yield is in general greater than the lending protocols because here you are dealing with multiple stablecoins at the same time instead of just one. So there is a bit of higher risk associated with it, and higher risk should come with a higher return. So you're going to get compensated for that. So that's something. Curve, again, Curve is operating in multiple different chains. Ethereum is probably too expensive, so probably not want to consider that. But there are other protocols that operates in different blockchains in the cheaper gas fees that might give you a better opportunities for this kind of providing liquidity so that people can exchange between different stablecoins or even different cross-chain, different chains you want to exchange. And finally, the very interesting, unique type of protocols that exist in the cryptocurrency market is the yield aggregator. Again, as I said, this is kind of very interesting. It's leveraging on the existing DeFi protocols. So this is like a derivative idea that it doesn't work by its own, but it's leveraging on the previous ones like Aave, Compound, or Curve that I have just talked. So again, they kind of optimize and automate the task of maximizing the return that you could have earned from these protocols if you were really paying attention to it. And the reward tokens are sometimes locked, like Curve token. If you wanted to get the reward to its max, then you have to commit it. You have to lock it for a certain period of time. So longer you lock, then higher yield you're going to get, but then there's no guarantee when it's unlocked, the price is going to stay the same. So some yield aggregators actually provide the swapping this. So you actually lock your Curve token for 1 year, then they're going to give you their own token in exchange for those locked Curve tokens. So you actually get some kind of a deal that you can actually liquidate your asset right away. You're just not getting their own native token as you initially promised. So there are kind of a lot of things that you can do out of these yield aggregators. There are multiple different ones, to the basic ones, to the complex ones. They provide like full kind of a fund management service. You can think of this as really as like a mutual funds or hedge fund of the DeFi protocols. The most famous being the Yearn Finance. You probably heard about it. That's how the idea started from. Now every single protocol, every single blockchain, there is corresponding yield aggregators nowadays that can boost your yield to certain. So the quick example is the Convex Finance. This is operating on top of the Curve. So instead of you go to Curve Finance, as spoken earlier, to lock up your liquidity and commit your the Curve token reward lock for a few months, you can just change it. You can get a Convex token instead without the CVX token as a reward, while the locked Curve token belongs to the protocol. And then this Convex token price somehow has gone up dramatically since December. So actually it became better off to do in Convex investment rather than doing the Curve token. Don't know why, but that has been the case and happens to be the case right now. So people are actually depositing their liquidity in the Curve, but they are actually putting them in the Convex to get a CVX token instead of CIV as a reward to boost your. So there are multiple things if you do your research. There's a lot of things to research, right? There's no single website that summarizes everything, and the landscape is changing every day. So actually you have to really keen and aware of it. But even the basic ones can provide actually seemingly unbeatable yield compared to the traditional financial system that like sitting at like 6 to 8%. Now there are some opportunities again in different blockchains. Again, a lot of these started from Ethereum, as it's the biggest blockchain with a smart contract functionality. But again, the gas fee is the killer for us, for retail investors. So similar products are available in pretty much all the major blockchains, becoming pretty much the default, whether have gained enough attraction or not. So again, few of the blockchains that has different features like this has a decent liquidity are probably Solana, Terra, Avalanche, and Binance Smart Chain BSC. Those are the four that I can name who has a good amount of liquidity pulled into this decentralized finance protocols, as well as have a low fees. So for each of those items that I've mentioned earlier, like stablecoin lending, AMM, so yield aggregator, I have a corresponding things in here in Binance Smart Chain, for instance. I have a Venus XVS token that works as a stablecoin lending like Aave. I have a Belt Finance that works like stablecoin AMM in the Binance Smart Chain. And there is protocol like Auto Farms or Alpaca Finance that works in Binance Smart Chain that works just like a yield aggregator in other. So there are always corresponding to these three classifications. There is a corresponding protocols that residing in different blocks. Something now, are these really free money then? No, not necessarily. They come with a huge risk. The biggest risk is the smart contract risk. So I really view these DeFi protocols as like a credit product, and the credit risk is not really they go default, but more like they get exploited because of these are operating as an automated system. So whenever there is a bug, when there is a logical error in the code, which is vetted, but there's no guarantee that everything is vetted. And it's very vulnerable to hackers to steal their funds from depending on different protocols. So there has been history that these protocols been hacked multiple times. So this is the entire hack history of 2021, how many these DeFi protocols were exploited. So you see the size is insane. The biggest one being Poly Network, 611 million loss, and there's a little bit smaller losses here and there, 10 million, 100 million. So total amount lost is actually easily exceeding couple $2 billion out of these hacks last year. So it's amazing people how still use them even after all these incidents. So the idea is actually you are supposed to go with the proven pools, right? You don't want to just go to random pools because they just pay 20%. It's a good thing. You may want to do your own study. And even if they are providing a lower yield, but those proven protocols with a higher yield, more people are using it, that probably means that it's more safe and more likely insured as well. So it's a really trade-off. If you go to some protocols that has a really higher yield, that comes with a higher smart contract. So their token prices as well as the protocols can be hacked, and you might end up losing everything you have, potentially speaking. Well, I lost everything that I had in one of the protocols. That is potentially possible. Some risk that you keep in mind. It's really a risk-return trade-off, where the risk is really the credit counterparty risk here instead of the market risk, that price of the cryptocurrency market flow. And then this is probably less of a concern if you're just putting the stable coin, but if you're also interested in investing on their own native tokens like Aave, Compound, and Curve, and their analogous versions in other protocols, it's this is really the word that no auditing is done. Anyone can do it. Any anonymous developers, any scammers can create a protocol, hype it, and they can run away. Basically, the rug pull idea. So a lot of tokens in these protocols have seen initial hype and then drop 99.99% in a matter of night. So when you wake up, your token price drops by 99.99% because the developers just dumped their token and exited, right? I made enough money, I'm just gonna dump it, I'm done, no more developments. Hey, good luck, guys. And these are very vulnerable to such a risk if you go to this lower risk protocols. And always the biggest challenge that, when you are dealing with the stable coins in the crypto world is that there's no guarantee, although I think we have a pretty good foundation for most of the stable coins right now, that it can be exchanged for $1 USD as they are promised, right? You can do so in most of cases through the exchanges. It's a bit harder to do in Canada, especially in Ontario. I don't know what kind of platforms or exchanges that you are using, but I find that it's a little bit annoying in Ontario, at least, to change the stable coins back to fiat, like if you want your USD coming back to your bank account. But there's no guarantee that this is always done because, again, these entities are not fully audited, except the USD Circle. They are fully audited and everything is transparent. So there's no doubt that it will be guaranteed to one-to-one. But in case of other stable coins, there is literally no guarantee that it always can be exchanged for $1 USD. If something can go wrong, as this Wall Street Journal and a lot of people have been suspecting, whether USDT, the biggest stablecoin out there, does really have a peg value of 1-to-1. Do they have really enough reserve to pay it back if everyone decides to redeem at once. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share today. I think given the limited time, I think I was jumping a lot in between without covering the background. So it might have been a little bit of too much a leap in between the steps, but hope everyone found it as a sort of introductory and useful step that you can look it up if you're personally interested. And I'm open to answer any questions if anyone has any specific ideas. So let's jump into the Q&A session, ask something.
Thank you so much, Professor. You definitely covered a lot I had no idea about, yield aggregators, stable coins, so much. So thank you so much for that. Everyone, you're all welcome to ask if you have any questions. We covered a lot of different topics. I'll start off, Professor. Could you elaborate on the time when you said you kind of got the rug pulled out of you? You said, it's kind of I imagine it's not a great story with one of those coins.
Oh, so it wasn't really the rug pull. So it's a little bit different story. It was the smart contract risk. So there was one of the protocol that's called a qubit finance that operates in the Binance Smart Chain. So I had my, not the stable coin, I had my BNB, the Binance native token, BNB in there, because they were paying a higher interest rate out of it. They were paying like 10% yield or something. So I thought like, okay, they were vetted and I kind of knew the team. So, okay, maybe it's trustable. I had it there, enjoying the return for a while. But I think it was like last December or something that they were trying to expand their platform by availing this so-called cross-chain compatibility. So if expanding to Ethereum network as well. And then they had an issue with their code. So it got exploited, they got hacked, and they lost basically everything they had in the protocol. Everything got stolen because of the bug. So everything was stolen. Whoever's providing liquidity to this protocol basically lost 100% of the asset, including myself. So in one day I wake up and then I just found out that everything was locked and stolen basically, entirely gone. So this is something that was more extreme case because not really 100% is gone. Usually you retrieve a percentage of it, like recovery rate. But that protocol had this really severe bug that ended up losing everything. So that was a big problem. So any of these examples that I have in here, you can think of it as a kind of it. That was the more extreme example. You're losing 100%, but there are some cases you lose like certain portion of your assets through.
And when are you able to know whether or not a new coin might have bugs that can be exploited?
Sorry, what? Come again? I didn't get your question.
Like what do you look for? What do you look for in a new coin that gives you kind of certainty that it won't be exploited?
Okay, so there are a couple of things you want to look at. Number one is the team, right? Who are the one behind the team? So if there are protocols that doesn't hide the identity of the team, then already kind of suspicious, rings a bell. They don't want to reveal who they are. And then next is who are the backers? So who are the ones that funded these projects? If they are like notable investors or hedge funds or the venture capitalists, then it's a bit more trustful. They are the backers compared to the random protocols that we don't know who they are. And also how many audits that they have gone through, whether the protocol has been audited by known cybersecurity firms. So those are the things that you have to individually check. There's unfortunately not a single measure of like a credit scoring agency in this world yet. This might be something in the future becoming more popular. So you will have to really take an individual risk. But even after that, you still have to kind of live with it because even major protocols that has passed all those still managed to get hacked unbelievably to a certain extent. So something that happens in the very early when things are developed. But those will at least kick you out of the really high risk like of losing everything if you have done those checks right.
Got it. Okay. And what platforms do you recommend are good exchanges to buy on?
What do you mean by exchange to buy on?
Like a good platform to buy, like Coinbase. I know you can buy crypto on Simple, Binance.
So again, it's a little bit tricky. So I don't know what everyone is doing. Ontario has a really very tricky regulation that doesn't allow many platforms where you can do this. My personal favorite is FTX, but unfortunately, FTX is not available in Ontario. It's available for BC resident, but not Ontario, surprisingly. And I do it through my personal connection, to be honest. I have a relationship with the brokerage firm so that I can trade assets to my personal brokerage. So for people in Ontario, I don't think you really have much choice, to be honest. I think Newton is one choice, probably a little bit cheaper than West Simple. CoinSquare, if anyone is using it, is another choice. BitBuy, I don't know how much liquidity they still have after they've been sold to the new firm called Wonderfy. I don't know what they're doing. So in Ontario, residents really limited. At Coinbase, I wouldn't really recommend it because I heard that for Canadian users, you pay really high fee for trade. I think you pay extremely large amount of fee as a Canadian user compared to the US. So in terms of considering the fee, I think those are probably the only remaining choices for the users, Ontario residents. If people have more ideas, do let me know. Again, I'm using my personal connection, so I can't say what's the best.
Fair enough. If anyone has any questions.
So let me go into the chat and see, can we have the PPT? So I mean, the organizers have the PPT, so feel free to circulate it to whoever's interested. I leave it to you guys. Are you guys posting? Okay, you'll be posting the recording, so that's great. Tab site. Sure, next question. Is it possible to be accused of chain hopping if we use the Binance network to exchange between coins? What do you mean by accused of a chain hopping? If you can elaborate a little bit more on that.
I've heard that a lot of money launderers, what they do is that they switch between multiple cryptocurrencies really quickly. And I was just wondering is it possible that if you're exchanging between those networks, it's possible to get caught in between one of those?
Not necessarily, not your assets. So what those people do is like they steal assets from Binance Smart Chain, for instance, and to launder their asset, if it's residing within the same network, is easily trackable. So they just switch everything into a different network to hide, disguise with where it is. So those are basically the cross-chain transfers. I have never seen a case that cross-chain transfer assets being hijacked, as I think that's what you are kind of worried about. So I wouldn't be worried about it when you're transferring assets from one chain to the other, the asset being hijacked. So I wouldn't be, I've never seen that case so far for that. There was a little bit of concern regarding that in the Solana network when between the Solana and Ethereum blockchain, the bridge was exposed to certain risk at that one point of the time. I wonder what happened at the end. It was sometime in January. So that was the only occasion that I've seen that. But other than that, I've never experienced any issue with hijack. So for retail users like us, right? So if you want to actually transfer your assets from one chain to the other, actually, the better way of doing it, you do it through the centralized exchanges. It's kind of ironic, but that actually turns out to be the fastest and the safest way to do it. So if you want to transfer your assets from Binance Smart Chain to Ether, right, then you actually put, if you have a Binance account, for instance, or FTX account, which is free to open, I think you can still open it. You can just basically transfer your asset into the Binance exchange account, and then you transfer it out to the specific network that you want to transfer it out to. You can specify. So the centralized exchange is going to do the job. And that usually turns out to be the safest way to do it than using those bridges, the decentralized bridges that does the job for you, exchange between them.
Thank you. That was very informative. I also had another question, if that's okay, if there's time. You mentioned that stable coins have like higher yields a lot of times than more popular coins like Ethereum. If I understood correctly, is why would that be the case? Like, how do they generate those
So
yields?
the yield coming out of Ethereum's or any POS, the proof of stake tokens, are not coming from. So again, there are two ways that you can earn yield coming from those tokens, right? One is exactly going as this lending. So if you go to this lending protocols, like let's say Aave, you see that I just pulled out the stable coins here, but people can also lend Bitcoins or lend Ether or lend any other coins. Now, if you think about the landscape, the nature of the cryptocurrency market, no one wants to borrow Bitcoin. No one wants to borrow Ether. Everyone is like long mindset. Everyone thinks this is going to move. People actually borrow stable coins to purchase more tokens, not the other way around. So which means that there is extremely low demand for borrowing Bitcoin and Ether. So the yield is extremely low. So if you're actually providing those assets in here for lending, the yield is like 0.01%, 0.02%, because no one wants to borrow, because it's really matched between the supply and demand. Everyone has tokens. Everyone has insane amount of tokens in this world, but no one has any cash. No one has like stable. The market is like 2 trillion, while the total amount of cash in this market is maybe a little less than 200. So people are borrowing stable coins, they're borrowing cash, but no one is willing to borrow tokens. So that's one reason why the yield is extremely low. Now there's an alternative way of making yield that's probably more familiar to us, is staking. If you actually lock up this POS tokens, the proof of stake tokens, then you're going to get yield as an out of it. So that is actually going to be higher in return in some occasions. Ethereum Ethereum yield has come down quite a bit. I think sitting at like 6 to 7% right now. But some of the newer POS tokens pay higher yield. I think like Near protocols or Phantom, even Solana, they probably pay something close to 8 to 10% in annualized. But I was kind of trying to stay away from it because those proof of stake staking yield is actually completely exposed to the price risk, right? The amount of rate you're going to get is in their native token, your fundamental. It's not really coming in fiat currency like USDC or USDT. You're not really getting dollar amount. So those are different stories that I covered today, those staking yield. But those are not really passive income in the sense that I wanted to define passive income as the very strict form that it takes minimal price risk. Once you take the price risk, I just consider that as not a passive. Two different. Do I know the MetaTrader 5? What are your thoughts on it? Unfortunately, this is first time I heard the MetaTrader 5. So if you can educate me on that, that'd be great.
Hey, Professor, I was also going to ask, when you referred to in the yield aggregator section, you were talking about yield aggregator protocols provide to swap this feature. Is that similar to like a swap in like currency markets or fixed income markets?
Yeah, to a certain extent, this is really currency. You are swapping one token to the other token, literally. So this is literally the currency swap, yeah, in the same sense.
Oh, that's cool.
So they are providing a service to swap it based for you. That's what the role of this yield aggregator.
Right. Yeah, no, that's really cool. That definitely got me very interested in that one section of the yield aggregators. That one really stood out to me.
Yep. Question, I wanted to ask how we can learn about more crypto. What site courses would you recommend, if any? How you can learn? Again, the best way to learn it yourself quickly, if you want to do it in a more course format, I think Coursera has tons of choices. So just go to Coursera, blockchain, and then you just pick the one with the top with the highest number of viewers, and that's probably the easiest way to do it. A lot of them are free actually, so that will give you a very good introduction. Within the school, yeah, thanks Noah, my course, Fin 699 is the only course that touches it in the finance department. I don't know whether ITM has courses in it. They might. Again, I'm in the finance department. I'm more finance perspective, right? I'm not really a computer science guy or technology guy here. Just talking everything in the perspective of finance instead of in the tech perspective. So you will find more tech perspective courses in Coursera. Finance perspective courses are a bit harder to find, but there are many courses that cover decentralized finance nowadays, actually. If you go to Coursera, just type decentralized finance, you see many of them by renowned professors around the world. I personally recommend the one by Professor Campbell Harvey by Duke University. He has a course on decentralized finance. It's pretty handy for the quick one. In general about crypto, yeah, I think just blockchain courses in Coursera. If you are really a good self-learner.
If we don't have any more questions, then we can move on to the next stage. Let's give people another moment. Give it a moment. Once again, thank you, Professor, for coming. And thank you, everyone, for attending. It's been a really great semester. We really enjoy giving over these workshops, teaching these topics, having our competition.